welcome back to the morning show here on the Rise News. Joining us now for World Brief and to review some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi.
Good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Vinvai.
Morning,
and I know Dr. Ruben isn't there, but huge congratulations to him. Once again, leading the charge when it comes to educational prowess. Goodness gracious. Putting us all to shame, isn't he?
Yeah. Putting us on our toes.
All righty. Well, let me tell you what is going right. Definitely. Okay, well, let me tell you what's happening around the world. We actually start the World Brief this morning with a bit of breaking news coming out of Pakistan. Now, the former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan has just been sentenced to 14 years in prison. This is over a land corruption case dealing between him and a property tycoon. Now, if you didn't already know, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, who is a world-renowned former cricket player as well, is actually already in prison. He's been in prison since August 2023 related to a whole litany of corruption charges. He actually faces more than 150 charges. This conviction represents one of the largest when it comes to the financial scale of this fraud. Now, what it does hinge on is the exchange of land in return for favors from a property tycoon. And unfortunately, as has been the case with many legal issues befalling the former Pakistani Prime Minister, it does continue to tarnish his reputation as a leader who was embroiled in corruption. We'll continue to give you the updates as and when they come. But moving on to the different parts of the World Brief, TikTok could soon be going dark for millions of US users. Now, if you are already on the app, you will know that many users have been making jokes, making videos about how the fact that TikTok may well go dark for them on the 19th of January, which is this coming Sunday. And that reveals a larger issue between the United States and China. Now, ahead of that, Donald Trump and to some extent Joe Biden have both been trying their efforts in order to stay, delay, or even cancel this ban. Donald Trump himself has actually talked about how he is hoping that he will be able to sway the Supreme Court to delay this decision for some time, because there are many people who do see quite a lot of value when it comes to the use of this social media platform. But it is feared that it will go dark, and that is because TikTok's parent company, a company called ByteDance, is owned by a Chinese institution. Well, it's owned by a Singaporean, actually, TikTok is. But the fear is that the proximity ByteDance has with the Chinese government, which clearly makes the United States very, very uncomfortable. So the proposed deal was to sell TikTok to a US owner so that it could continue to be accessible to US users, something that TikTok Singaporean leader has essentially refused to do. What he did say he was going to do was switch off TikTok to US users at this point. So it is believed that the 19th of January, this coming Sunday, will be the day that it goes dark, should there not be any type of intervention before then. We'll wait and see. But funnily enough, another social media platform very similar to TikTok called Red Door or Red Note has been used and downloaded very much by US users who are trying to circumvent the lack of perhaps association with TikTok coming up until this point. Again, keep our eyes across that issue, but it is believed that many people in the technology spaces will be very, very eager, especially since they will be seeing Donald Trump this weekend and, of course, into the early part of next week, as Monday is Donald Trump's inauguration for the second time. And speaking of his inauguration, even though we do know it will be aptly attended by many people, one person who we know will not be in attendance is Michelle Obama, the former First Lady. Now, she had released this information from her office a few days ago. It hasn't really come as a surprise, but what many people have said, some in support of the decision, some against it, say that she should be there, say that she shouldn't be there. But perhaps if we look at the recently concluded US election up until this point, we do know that former First Lady Michelle Obama was very, very involved in the campaigning and campaigned hard against Donald Trump. Some would even argue she campaigned the hardest against him, and naturally would be very disappointed that he eventually emerged winner of this election. We also know that we did not see First Lady Michelle Obama at Jimmy Carter's funeral, had she attended, she would have actually been sitting down next to President-elect Donald Trump. She did not attend. She cited a scheduling conflict, and instead her husband attended the funeral alone, and he sat next to Donald Trump. And it did seem as though the two gentlemen did have a very calm and seemingly jovial conversation between the two of them during the funeral. And now it is now confirmed that Michelle Obama will not attend the inauguration. There hasn't actually been an explicit reason for why she will not be attending. Both hers and her husband, former President Barack Obama's offices, have confirmed that the First Lady will not be the former First Lady will not be attending, but former President Barack Obama will be in attendance, and it has continued to ruffle a lot of feathers. I would be very interested, ladies, to hear what your thoughts are on whether or not she should attend, or at least tell the world why she will not be in attendance to this inauguration. And then moving on, just finally, when we go back to looking at the state of the world, the conflicts that we're seeing, the United Kingdom has pledged a lot of weaponry to Ukraine, something that will definitely be music to the ears of Volodymyr Zelensky, as Keir Starmer had been on a visit to Ukraine and talked about how there's definitely a lot of sympathy and a lot of support, financial, military support, when it comes to this war Ukraine is facing, this invasion of Russia in its country. So what we have heard in the earlier parts of this week is that the United Kingdom has entered into a so-called 100-year pledge, a relationship with Ukraine, and to that effect, the release of these weapons, the boosting of Ukraine's arsenal, is an example of that prolonged relationship the United Kingdom is having with Ukraine as it stands. Those are your stories on the World Brief this morning, ladies. Love to hear your thoughts before we go to the papers.
All right. Thank you so much, Adefemi, for that. First of all, let me just say, we talked about the ByteDance TikTok issue a number of times. We've wrote this on the business news, and it's great, that we're talking about it this morning, as this is almost the eve to the eve of the day when that plug might just be pulled off 170 million subscribers in the United States of America. The issue has been ongoing for a while, about a year, over a year now. It's gone through the processes in court. Appeal court upheld the lower court, and now the final court would be the Supreme Court, which would rule on Sunday, the 19th of January. And it's interesting because Sunday 19th holds a lot of significance in many ways. It's the eve of, or it's the last day in office for President Joe Biden, formally. At least the other day would be to inaugurate the new president. It would also be the beginning of the first phase of the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. So it's the end of an era in that way. And for TikTok users in America, it's also the end of an era, except by some miracle, which looks very unlikely, the Supreme Court decides to delay or actually move away from the previous ruling by the appeal court. It seems very unlikely because they have come out, some of the Supreme Court judges have come out to say that national security is paramount, and that their views expressed by a number of parliamentarians and by Congress members and a number of United States citizens that TikTok, owned by ByteDance, which has some form of control by the Chinese government, is a threat to national security. I think it's important to know that the Chinese government have consistently dissociated themselves from ByteDance, saying that they have no influence and that it's not anything to do with them. But we'll see how that plays out. And you're absolutely correct. Red Note earlier this week had one of the largest downloads in terms of apps on app stores across the United States of America, almost in defiance, as if the American citizens are saying that we still want TikTok on our soil, but it's not happening. So let's see. It's also owned by a Chinese company, by the way. So let's see if they'll ban that as well, if investigations prove that it would be a threat to national security. On Michelle Obama, a number of breakaways by the Democrats come Monday, 20th of January, during the inauguration. Beyond Michelle Obama's team bringing out a statement saying that she would not be in attendance without giving any reason, former House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi is also not attending. Some Democrats are not attending. There's no formal boycott, but a number of key Democrats will not be there. Second of all is also that Vice President Kamala Harris refused to extend the traditional invitation to J.D. Vance to her office, at least to put him through. And she said, she was too busy. She has a lot on her plate, LA fires and other things. And so she doesn't have time to host him. Remember that also Mike Pence did not also invite her to as vice president when she won the election, and she had said that she didn't receive an invitation from him at all. And the other part of things, of course, would then be with regards to breaking away from tradition, is that there will be no formal farewell media chat between Joe Biden and outgoing President Joe Biden and the media. His team have said he has spoken a number of times to the media, so he doesn't need to have that formal tradition of the last one, but he's had fewer appearances in media. He did have a conversation on Wednesday, which people are saying should suffice. But a number of interesting, developments. We're looking forward to the most interesting 4 years, and I use interesting very liberally with President Donald Trump, but also very interesting inauguration ceremony, as it seems.
Absolutely. Still on TikTok. So Duolingo, which of course is that app that allows users to learn new languages and translate languages and so forth, has experienced a 216% surge in young Americans learning Mandarin. Well, what does this represent? This represents almost what I like to call the law of unexpected consequences, which is that as you're banning TikTok, which is accessible to 170 million young Americans, people are looking for an alternative. However, it also shows that young Americans are becoming more globally politically conscious than they have been known to be in the past. And they're also taking a stand and saying, well, if you're going to take away TikTok, then we, because they're being called digital refugees, digital refugees are going to migrate to other Chinese apps. And now you're seeing, like Ayo said, Red Note and a number of other apps. And guess what the outcome of this has been? The outcome, if you go, especially I've been reading a lot of Twitter threads and so forth, the outcome of this is that young Americans are starting to see China in a way they've never seen it before. Because remember, China is sort of perceived as, in a similar way as Russia is perceived within America, which is the communist state and so forth. And so now these young Americans are getting on these apps and are seeing that, okay, but China is actually a modern and developed place and so forth. The other day we were laughing with Rotis about how this content is so well packaged from the Chinese that some young Americans are even coming on Twitter to say, that Chairman Mao Zedong is a really cool guy, So now it's the law of unintended consequences, which is why I believe that, both the Biden administration and the Trump administration, as they go through this transition, are going to do everything possible to ensure that they do find an American buyer for TikTok. It is in their best interest because the outcome that's transpiring at the moment, unexpected, is something that nobody could have ever planned for. So I know that Senator Chuck Schumer has already pleaded with Joe Biden to extend the deadline by 90 days, which is allowed by law. And Donald Trump is also assured that he would try to ensure that if that extension happened in that 90-day period, that they could take whatever action was needed to keep TikTok on American cell phones, so to speak. I think it's beyond a cultural issue. It's also just, it's an image issue as well. The optics don't look good. As much as, Donald Trump is all for tariffs and all of that, the optics don't look good for shutting down, a foreign company. And investment is still important, and we're still coming out of the fallout of the Nippon Steel deal, which Joe Biden said was not healthy, was not in the interests of national security to have a Japanese company come and buy America's biggest steel company, that's U.S. Steel. So, we're seeing a lot of this international political economics playing out, but it's starting to seem as though Americans are now more wary of the Chinese than they are of Russians, which is something that one never ever thought would happen.
Well, thank you very, very much. Exactly that. And so we will be keeping our eyes peeled on many revolving parts taking place this very weekend. Let's move on to newspapers this morning. As ever, we begin with the front page of This Day newspaper. And This Day joins a whole host of Nigerian papers this morning looking at the tax reform bill. I know that you've touched on that already today, but let's look at the front page of This Day this morning. And as I said, This Day focuses on the update on the tax reform. Now, after many weeks of controversy, governors of 36 states of the Federation and the Presidential Tax Reform Committee have agreed on modalities for sharing the VAT. Now, we also see that this is a story picked up on the front page of the New Telegraph, which reports that the governors at the end of their meeting did endorse the sharing of the VAT proceeds on the basis of 50% equality. Now, that's unchanged from what is actually currently in operation. So that's clearly what they'd like to see continued. There's this 30% derivation from 20% currently in operation, and 60% then proposed by the Presidential Tax Reform Committee. So a lot of back and forth there. And then going back to this day this morning, interestingly enough, Oba Otudeko, who is the founder and chairman of Honeywell Group, has denied, according to this report, ever serving in First Bank's holding company. We know that he was the former chairman, but he, in terms of this holding, the parent company, he says that he's never served on that company in an executive capacity. And this is, of course, against the backdrop of the EFCC, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, releasing a charge report essentially against Oba Otudeko and other associates from First Bank, including Mr. Onosonya himself. And this is all to the tune of 12.3 billion naira. A fraud relating to that situation, so as to avoid a situation where people are condemned before due legal process has gone through. We will obviously continue to keep our eyes and ears on this story, but it is quite disheartening to hear the levels of alleged corruption taking place in the country. Well, moving on to the front page of the Punch this morning, and the Dangote Petroleum Refinery is planning to import more crude oil from they want to import from other parts of the world, Europe, for example, and that is because the imports that it's receiving from the NNPC, simply put, just aren't enough. They're no longer enough for the fuel production at the facility. Now, officials at the plant do say that the facility has ramped up production to about 500,000 barrels per day, and they do have a target of 650,000 barrels per day, which is a target that they're hoping to reach by June of this year, which is another example for why they are looking for other sources of crude in order to meet these targets. Moving on to The Guardian this morning, and The Guardian tells the story of farmers in northern Nigeria, how they have to first and foremost overcome the abuse and extortion in order to receive and reach their farms, receive access and reach their farms, only for them to be vulnerable, unfortunately, to accidental airstrikes against them. Now, they're caught in the middle as ever when it comes to this type of situation, first dealing with the bandits, the terrorists themselves, and then unfortunately being killed by airstrikes coming from the government. So a lot of personal experiences have been relayed in this article on the front page of The Guardian this morning. Now, moving on to the Daily Trust, which usually talks a lot about insecurity in Nigeria. To this same vein, the Daily Trust this morning reports on the families of the Zamfara airstrike victims demanding compensation, which is just another example of this situation where we're seeing that these airstrikes meant to flush out terrorists, meant to target terrorists, are actually allegedly killing civilians and just leaving them with no sort of recourse, which is why you're seeing the families, in this instance, the Zamfara state example, asking for compensation. Finally, the Daily Independent reports on the Minister of the FCT, one Nyesom Wike, who has revoked the plots of land belonging to 568 individuals, including Imo State Governor Hope Uzodinma and the Bayelsa State Governor Durodire, as well as the Senate Leader Okpeyemi Bamidele and also the Leader of NIDCOM, Abike Arewa Dabiri. So a lot of conversations happening there. Those are our Nigerian papers. I'm hoping we have enough time to at least discuss those.
All right, thank you very much, Adefemi. I think we have some minutes, and so that's great news. Well, I really want to talk about the Guardian newspaper headline and the report around what farmers in the north are facing and their inability to go back to their farms as a result of insecurity, especially the fact that in recent times, we've talked about agriculture, and later on today, we're actually going to be having a conversation from the farmer's perspective on agriculture. A lot of news has been reported by this administration on the gains, especially with regards to food security, and how if we're going to achieve food security as a nation, we have to shore up production in the agricultural sector and support our farmers. We have often said we can provide the tractors, provide the fertilizers, provide all these things, but if the farmers themselves cannot go to the farm, then it's all a waste. This also highlights what has become a concerning, a trait, or what has come up a number of times, which is this accidental bombing of civilians. Even though after almost each of them, the military comes out, or the armed forces, the Air Force comes out with reports saying that, oh no, they'd done their surveillance, and some of these community members were in cahoots with the terrorists. There's still a timeline of how innocent citizens have been caught up in these mistaken or accidental fires from our own military. And it's really sad. They highlight from 2014 to 2017, 2020, 2022, 2023, and 2024. And only this year already, in 2025, we brought up with the Chief of Defense Staff when he was here what happened in Zamfara State, and that the farmers are afraid that they're caught in the middle and they don't want to lose their lives. If we are serious about food security, we have to secure the farmers. We cannot bury our head in the sand and keep ignoring the fundamental issues while dealing with the surface or cosmetic areas and saying that we are doing much in that sector. I think that's really important. Then over to the, to this tax reform, because it's something we've talked about a number of times. It's an issue we brought up. One of the things I wanted to say, which I didn't talk about earlier when we were talking about this, was that it's important that, yes, the sharing formula that has been proposed now by the Governors Forum goes back to the equality at 50%, 30% for derivation, 20% for population, now proposed. The northern governors who oppose this, saying that they'd be marginalized if the proposal of 20-60-20 respectively was used, should then use this as an opportunity to go to the drawing board to see how to make their states more productive. Let's hope that this will be a lesson to see that everyone should go back and put on their thinking caps. That's why they were elected. Not just to wait for allocations from the center, but to think of creative ways to make their states productive, so that in the future, hopefully, we'll revisit this conversation and be able to have this conversation around this allocation, the allocation, percentile allocation. I think it's really important. It was an opportunity for us to really put those governors on their toes and get them to do the work that they were elected to do.
Right. Adefemi, what caught my attention is still on the front page of this day. Just within that tax reform article, there's a statement from a committee that was sat yesterday at the Senate, projecting that Nigeria's fiscal budget for 2026 will be 100 trillion naira. Now, mind you, we're still fighting. I'm sure you've watched all the videos, you've seen all the reportage from this week and last week, how the MDAs are fighting tooth and nail to try and defend 49.7 trillion. They're struggling to defend it and justify it. Now suddenly we're saying that, oh, we're projecting 100 trillion for 2026. We can't even see where the 49.7 is going to go. And 2024's budget is saying, is said to have performed with regards to capital expenditure only at 25%, which is well below a pass mark. So I'm not sure how we're already projecting onwards to 2026. However, the justification or the rationalization around it is that they were arguing that, well, the government is working to relinquish some funds that are being held by various government entities or by various entities. Now, what stuck out to me, though, in this entire discourse was the fact that the chairman of the Senate Committee on Appropriation, that's Senator Adiola of Ogun State, said that one of the major culprits that is holding on to government revenue is NNPC. And to quote his words, he said that there is still a form of subsidy happening within NNPC. So I'm curious, because I thought subsidy was gone. They said subsidy is gone, right? They said subsidy is gone. So I'm curious as to, and this is the statement from the senator, what is this subsidy? Why is there still a subsidy happening within the NNPC, as reported by the Senate, the chairman of the Senate Committee on Appropriation? And if there is a subsidy, why is it not trickling down to the common man? Because if NNPC is still enjoying any form of subsidy, you and I should be feeling it in our pockets. However, you and I are paying for fuel at market prices. So we don't get to do that. NNPCL is now a private entity. If they are going to be subsidized by government, which is what happens all around the world, however, we've been told subsidy is gone. But if there's going to be some form of subsidy happening within NNPCL, then every single citizen should also feel the benefits of that subsidy in their pocket. What is good for the goose should be good for the gander. That's all I have to say on that. I got very emotional about that. Yeah.
No, it's understandable. There are many people who feel the same way, Vimbai.
Well, thank you so much, Adefemi. Always great to have you on the show. And I hope you have a great weekend. Keep warm. I know it's quite cold in the United Kingdom. And I hope you're also going to be there at the inauguration, bringing us news live from Washington on Monday.
It's crossed.